Welcome to the Artificial Intelligence Podcast with your host, Dr. Tony Huang. Today, I'm with Matt and Neil from Anonomatic. Matt and Neil, can you both introduce yourselves briefly?
Love to. I'm Matt Fleck, the founder and CEO of Anonomatic.
And I'm Neil Heller, also the founder, and I have on the COO role. I tend to look after more of the business side of things, where Matt is the inventor of the technology and really knows our tech super well and has spent years putting it together.
Very cool. So I'm interested in how you two got together and formed this company of yours.
Sure. It actually all started right around the time of the pandemic. I'd already pretty much designed, developed, and had this technology in production for our initial customer. And when the pandemic hit and everything kind of just stopped and went kind of wonky, I was out hiking one day and I met a man on top of a mountain, and we started talking about what I was doing. And he owned an analytics and a data security company. And I started telling him about what he was doing, and he came back and said, "I know somebody you need to meet." And he introduced Neil and I, and we hit it off, and we've been working together ever since.
Yeah, you can imagine getting an email saying, "Neil, you need to meet Matt. He'll fill you in." And that's kind of how things started. And I looked at LinkedIn, who is this guy, Matt Fleck? What has he done? And we very quickly started talking, and there was a real gap in the market for utilizing data that is typically protected by healthcare data, education data, any type of protected data. And as we talked more and more, it became obvious there was something really different in a way to really change the market and change how people use data without worrying about their privacy risks.
So for the viewers, can you describe what a protected piece of data looks like?
Sure, that would be the things that people are most concerned about being publicized. So if you think of your own data, whether it be your financial records or your health records, you've got all of the transactions, all the things, every doctor visit, every credit card purchase, all that sort of stuff. And when that gets exposed, there's a big problem. And we've been hearing about breach after breach after breach. But the Anonomatic viewpoint is that when all that business data, your transactions, are all physically and logically separated from the discrete values that identify it, for instance, your name, your social security number, your birth date, when those values aren't present in the business data, but the business data remains 100% useful, well, then you actually have data that can solve your security problems. You can achieve your business goals and not be subject to the mercies of the cyber community.
So I'm curious as to what are the current methods right now being used for to try to protect this data? Are we changing out sensitive parts of the data with hash keys, or what's the current method right now that everyone's using?
There's a number of different ways, and by and large, they've been the same processes and the same techniques for the last 50 years. The only thing that's really changed in these decades is the level of math. So primarily people will use one form of encryption or another, or they'll use something which is called tokenization, where they'll take one value out and they'll replace it with another. That's when they want to actually do in-data protection. Other things that they will do is build firewalls and role-based security access controls, and basically a lot of overhead and compliance around it. We kind of refer to those as guard dogs and fences, right? You basically will just build up and protect and keep anybody from getting into your data and seeing anything that they absolutely shouldn't see. But as we can tell from all the breaches that have been going on, they don't really work.
Yeah. So how do breaches work in general? Is it do they have a man in the middle, or is it a social engineering hack? What's the most common form to breach protected data?
I would say, how do breaches happen? My answer to that would be, how do car accidents happen? There's any number of different ways. So insider attacks are breaches that involve somebody on the inside either intentionally or unintentionally, being part to blame, have a significant portion of it. So that's people being sloppy with their passwords, answering phishing emails, talking to the wrong person, leaving their system logged in, or on the engineering side, not putting the necessary protections or adequate protections in when they build things like an integration or an interface, or they provide access to a partner. So many breaches have been achieved and systems penetrated because there was an open path through an integration that was set up so that somebody could, for a legitimate purpose, get in and do things.
I do know that companies do hire third-party companies to go and attempt to like try to hack into into the company through either like social engineering attacks or like phishing attacks. Is that typically like the best method to try and like mitigate these hacks, or is it like do you usually just start off at the core and try to work your way out rather than like hiring third parties to come in and try to solve like these holes that are in your defenses?
Well, what the steps that you take to validate your protections are going to be dependent upon what those protections are. If you're relying on firewalls and role-based access control, encryption and tokenization, then those sort of penetration tests are really your only avenue to do it. But it's, you're relying upon the creativity of the person that you've hired to be able to, and creativity and knowledge to be able to get through, to be able to see a gap. And one of the things that I think is just absolutely going to cause complete havoc for every industry and around the world is when the generative AI, the Gen AI capabilities are paired with quantum computers. And suddenly we call that basically, malicious AI. And what happens at that point is the quantum powered Gen AI will be able to try so many different attacks in such a quick and short period of time that no person is going to be able to do it. And all they need to get is a little bit further, each and every time, or even 1 out of 10 million times, to be able to slowly get their way through any sort of protection.
So like, are you saying that like if quantum computers like actually came into reality that we're all kind of screwed because everything is built in like a legacy, quote unquote legacy system that's not adaptive to say like a quantum computer, and so like the first nation state that can develop a quantum computer could basically like hack into every single known like defense? Is that what's going on?
I think that there is going to be extensive and pervasive breaches that are powered by quantum computers. Yes.
So like right now, what's kind of like the best method to stop breaches like that? Or is there or is like everybody still trying to like develop the next like defense to stop the quantum computer hacks?
What I think is the best is going to be a very biased answer, because we think that the Anonomatic solution is hands down the best solution. Aside from the Anonomatic solution, which I'm sure we're going to cover at some point, the way to protect it, some avenues will be able to kind of stop it, and that's basically to unplug your system from any sort of outside access, right? So, and the military does this a lot, so that your system is 100% isolated. You can't even walk into the rooms where there are terminals with a USB card or anything like else. So you actually have to have very strong physical controls. But guess what is also happening throughout the industry today and has been for several years, and that's the mass migration to the cloud. Cloud computing brings so much capability to organizations and scaling and costs and flexibility, but you do not have physical control of those areas. So folks like AWS and Microsoft, they're the ones who are going to be managing them. And they have professionals who are highly paid and highly trained to keep everything safe and secure. But we've all known that, there's been, how many software releases to any Microsoft product because, oh, a vulnerability was found. And that's going to be the same with basically anything. And so when a vulnerability is found and can be exploited, suddenly you have tens of thousands of organizations whose entire infrastructure is at risk immediately. And if that, if the hostile force that's doing it is a quantum powered force, then they would be able to just have devastating impact immediately.
Yeah. So I'm curious as to what your point of view is in terms of like protecting, like methods to protect the like PHI, PII data, but also the balance between protection versus like the speed of innovation. Because like right now, everybody's going crazy over Gen AI, and they want to deploy Gen AI to basically everything that they have, including data that's like PHI, PII data. So I'm wondering like what's the best balance between like protecting the PHI data versus deploying like emergent technology like Gen AI? What's the best use, or like what's the best method to deploy it?
Sure, and Gen AI, in our viewpoint, or at least mine, is primarily an evolution and just a massive step in the ability to be able to consume data and then learn from it and do something else. So the problem itself isn't new, it's the scale of the problem that has suddenly gotten everybody's attention, because it can go out and it can read all the data that is out there and come up with new stuff, and it doesn't forget anything. So the Anonomatic technology was designed and developed when we were asked by an organization that oversees all the healthcare facilities for the Los Angeles Unified School District. There were over a dozen there then at that time. There's about 16 of them now, including Planned Parenthood Los Angeles, that run school-based health centers. And what this organization for LAUSD wanted to do was to be able to combine all that student level encounter data, which is protected by the HIPAA regulations, and marry that at the individual level with the FERPA protected data from the school district of daily attendance and standardized test scores, graduation rates. As you can imagine, you have two highly regulated, extremely sensitive types of data for minors that needs to be collected, combined, and learned from. And having that sort of data be protected with any of the then existing or even today current standard protection means like encryption, tokenization, firewalls, and so on. Looking at the situation as we did at that time, we realized that there was no technology that would survive for 50 years. Right. And that's how long we felt we absolutely had to keep that data 100% secure and private, and nobody could ever figure out whose data was in there. So in realizing that that was our challenge, that was the problem, what we did is we looked at, okay, forget what's out there, just go back to basics. What makes this data dangerous? What makes the data dangerous is that there were all those business details, the encounter, what students went in for, what sort of prescriptions they got, treatments, all that sort of thing, and that data was identified. But if you logically and physically separated all the business data from the very few discrete values that tell you whose business data that is, but you are still able to consolidate all the data at the individual level and actually even bring all the different HIPAA records from different healthcare service providers together at the individual level from the school district, and bring it together at the individual and be able to answer questions like, when a student starts getting treated for asthma, what's going to happen to their attendance records? What is the impact of smoking on graduation rates? Question after question after question that nobody had ever been able to get an answer for. You could suddenly not only collect that data, learn from it, but you could start implementing policy that would actually change people's lives. And that solution and the insights It's going on 5 years now, right? They've had 4 years that this technology has been in place. And what we like to say is the hackers can't steal what isn't there. So in this data warehouse that has all those healthcare records and all those academic records, there's not a single byte of personal information. And yet all that data is achievable or aggregatable and consolidatable at the individual level. And that's nothing anybody has ever been able to do before. And the insights that they're publishing these days, and if anybody is interested in it, the LA, they just published their latest round of results. And it really is fascinating work. And they are changing people's lives because they're able to get access to this data and use it.
So what are like the current trends that are happening right now in the data protection industry? Is there like new types of methodologies or tools that you guys are using in order to protect people's data?
Yeah, so when you look at the current trends and protection, things that are going on in the data protection market, I think one of the most interesting to look at is what's driving some of those trends and what the root causes. Right now, there's a lot of breaches where data is being harvested. Encrypted data is being harvested, protected data is being harvested. That data can't yet be used. And as Matt talked about before, as quantum computer comes along, quantum computing is going to make it possible so that data can actually be not just harvested, but interpreted and discovered and made usable. So one of the things that we're looking at and what we see as a big trend is how can you protect data so that if it is harvested, it's useless? And this is the concept that we've really been thinking about quite a bit, is how do you take data, separate the individual identifying data from that business data or the encounter data if it's in the medical space, and then make that data so it's usable, but if it were stolen, it would be useless. So very often, if you were to steal someone's encounter data, you would know that someone had a blood pressure there of 130/20, their eye color is blue, their weight is 150 pounds, and a lot of other data. That data is very useless. So this concept of taking data, separating it, and making it useful becomes really, really powerful.
So tell me more about the this company that you guys built, Anonomatic. I'm assuming it does something with data protection. Can we walk through like what you guys have built and what's like your flagship product?
Sure. Our flagship product is the PII Vault, and it was built around the Los Angeles Unified School District's needs to correlate healthcare data with academic data. And Matt talked about that a little bit. The real challenge was when you had the data that was together, it was very scary. But when you separate the individual data, identifying information from the encounter data, you can do a lot with it. So we created a product called the PII Vault, spent about 4 or 5 years in R&D. It's been in production for almost 5 years now. And that product, PII Vault, actually allows the PII to be stored separately from the rest of the data. Now, with the migration to cloud, everybody wants to say, what do we do with our individual data, our PII data? Thought had been, let's put it all in the cloud. And actually, when we initially started Anonomatic, we thought we would have a cloud service. We very quickly realized that nobody would use our multi-tenant system sponsored by Anonomatic to put their private data in there. So we created what's called a containerized solution. It's technology that allows the customer to put the PII wherever they want it, but separate from the rest of the information, the business data or the encounter data. And it's taking that data, separating it is really the secret sauce of what we have. We actually filed and received several patents. One of them is something called polyanonymization. Polyanonymization is really, it's a cool technology. It's actually pretty exciting. At the simplest level, it's the separation of the PII from the rest of the data, storing that data separately, and then replacing all of that identifying information with what's called a polyanonymous ID or a poly ID. There's a lot more to that technically, but the idea of removing columns of PII from the data was something that had never been done before. And if the PII isn't in the data or the PHI isn't in the data, you can't take it.
That's really cool. So if I had my own like company that had PHI, PII data, and it wasn't connected, my data is not connected to the internet. Like how would I use like this PII vault? Can you guys deploy onto my own tenant that doesn't have internet connection? So it doesn't so that my data doesn't leave my my servers.
So the way that we would deploy it is that the PII vault would be put wherever the customer wants. It could be put in their environment on-prem, on bare metal. And when they're doing their deployment, they said, well, we've got the PII vault in our environment. And the rest of the data could be anywhere because it has no PII. It could be in the cloud. It could be wherever they need to go with it.
Well, that's really cool. So for like a average user like myself, what's like the best way to protect data that's like that has any type of identifier to me? So such as like social security numbers. How do I as a user like protect myself?
I'd say as an individual user, you're pretty much dependent upon the organizations that you entrust your data with to protect it adequately for you. There really isn't a way to protect your information when how many hundreds of companies have your data. And so I don't know how many breach notification letters that you've received, but I've received probably about 10 or 12 over the years of companies that I've dealt with who have lost my data.
Yeah, and like for instance, I have AT&T and I always get a data breach notification every now and then. It's like, folks, come on, like do a better job protecting my social security number. As a company, though, like how would you protect a company's database other than like placing like an air gap around the data itself? Like, what's the best method right now that like uh, Joe Schmo's company can implement that would at least add some layer of security to it?
Sure. The best way is to utilize the Anonomatic polyanonymization without a doubt. And if you think about all the different data breaches that you've heard about, such as AT&T or Ticketmaster or any of the other dozens that have been around, these large multi-billion multinational companies, you can't really assume that they drop the ball and they're not using every piece of standard protection that's out there. They are, and they're still getting hacked, and they're still losing your data and my data. The only way to protect that data is to ensure that if anyone steals it, none of the customer identifying data is included. Your name, your social security number, it's not in that data. The Anonomatic PII Vault has an industry-leading 7-layer protection security model, which makes the data that we are entrusted with the most secure data in any customer's environment, just bar none.
And so when you build on what Matt was just saying, so if you're a corporation and you're using the Anonomatic PII vault, what you're going to do is use our technology called Privacy ETL that allows Anonomatic PII vault to connect to any source on data ingestion. It will do what's called a privacy transformation, actually remove the PII or protect it in the way that the customer wants to protect it before sending it on to its storage or target destination.
I can give you another really nice tip, because most organizations, especially the large ones, do some sort of internal development, whether it be an actual application, a mobile app, or just reporting and analytics, what have you. And when that happens, there's this glass tower where your developers and your support people just have access to everything, right? They can see it and they're trusted with it. Well, a lot of breaches happen because of insider involvement, intentional or not. Anonomatic has the capability that our customers can put in place to where the production user who has to see the real information, when they make a request through an application or a database, they see the actual values. But if a developer or a support person who doesn't need them, or even an offshore UAT person, brings up production data and tests a screen or report, what have you, none of the identifying values are real. They're all synthetic and they're all created dynamically. And this isn't a separate test system. We can give you a test database if you like, but this can be the same query run against the same database by different users, returns either real production identity or synthetic identity. And that plugs and absolutely locks the door against insider involvement in your data breaches.
So what's the future for like data protection, especially in the age of Gen AI, right? Like the big elephant in the room is Gen AI, just because it right now it's being used on like cyber attacks, nation against nation. But you could point that towards like corporations and attack them to get access to their protected data. So like what's going to happen in the future? What's your guesses?
So when we look at Gen AI and protecting information with all the hacks and things that are going to happen, more and more data is going to be put in Gen AI systems. So the question becomes is, how do you ensure the data that goes in the Gen AI system doesn't put you at risk? And so by using something like the Anonomatic approach, which is the only thing out there that you can do this with, you intercept the data, you actually remove all of the PII before loading it into any type of Gen AI system. So you're doing all of your model training on data that doesn't compromise anyone's individual identity.
Yeah, and I would add to that with the incredible speed that Gen AI is progressing, and it's not going to slow down. How can anyone expect methodologies that are more than 50 years old to protect you in that environment? You need something new and dynamic, something that is that looks at the problem from an entirely new perspective and doesn't have the weaknesses of the legacy methodologies.
Well, yeah, thanks so much for being on the show, Matt and Neil. And until next time, stay curious.